Hello, this is Jeffrey here again. This time I'm going to give you a face with the name. I'm going to be doing a video on my Caterpillar Model 28 crawler. That's a gas tractor and it has been set up for doing logging. And this video will, well, it will be part video, which is the crawler as it sits currently, and part of it will be a slideshow of pictures I took of approximately 8 years ago when I bought it and got it running. So thank you for watching. This is my Caterpillar Model 28. When I stopped for lunch on my way bringing it home, I thought I'd take a picture of it. You can see the boom out the back with the cable threaded through it, which was for pulling in logs. I brought it home from 400 or 450 miles away, driving my Chevy C60, getting 6 miles to the gallon. And that's when gas was about $4 a gallon. I didn't want to keep track of how much that cost. When I bought this crawler, the seller told me that it had seized up while it was in the yard idling, so I took a chance figuring there probably wasn't much damage done, as it was just at idle when it was seized. And I also bought it without the carburetor. Here you can see, after I got it home, I took the two side cover plates off so I could check the crank out, and I found that the number one rod bearing was seized on the crank. So I unbolted it, and you could pull the rod down and piston down, and then you could pull the wrist pin out and take the rod out separately, and then you could pull the piston out through the side also. The way you could service these things is completely unlike anything nowadays. Here is the rod and piston from the number one cylinder after I had removed them. You can see the scoring on the piston, and you can see the galling of the port-in-place Babbitt bearing on the connecting rod. I polished the piston up, and I re-scraped the Babbitt bearing in the rod and cap until they were usable again. You can see these pistons kind of unique, but Caterpillar did that on other things too, where they would have the top could be unscrewed or unbolted from the rest of the piston. Also, I discovered why it had seized. There was a brass pin that ran the oil pump, had sheared, so I replaced with a mild steel one. Here you can see the galling on the number one journal on the crank. Most of what you see is Babbitt just stuck to the crank. The crank itself actually wasn't really damaged much. I polished it up real good. I reached up inside the cylinder with my hand with sandpaper and polished on the inside the cylinder also. But I couldn't really see. I just did it enough till it felt pretty as good as I thought it had to be, and then cleaned everything up real well. Here's the crank after I polished it up. As you can see, it looks quite well. Next, I installed the piston up in the bore. Then, with the piston sticking partway out of the bore, I put in the connecting rod and reinstalled the wrist pin, and then installed the rod onto the crank, taking shims out, as these engines have shims for setting the bearing clearance, and it just took shims out accordingly to get the proper bearing clearance. Then I put the side covers back on, and I installed a carburetor I found out of my pile of parts. It isn't the correct carburetor, but it bolted on with the right bolt pattern, and it worked fine. Here it is after I had gotten it running. To get it running, all I had to do was file the points on the mag, and it had spark. And after installing the carburetor I actually push started it to get it started. I've never quite been able to get it to start with the crank. It needs more attention. And when I was doing this, when I was running it on the yard, that's when I made a turn without paying attention to the boom sticking out the back, and I hit something with it and bent it. That's why in the following video you'll see there's no boom on it. Here's the Cat 28 as it sits today. If you look here, you can see these are the two covers that I took off in order to work on the engine. The carburetor, that's a Zenith. It's not the original carburetor. It's what I had in my collection of parts because I bought it without the carburetor. And you can see the manifold here is in very rough condition. Here they had made an adapter or whatever to go down, because the original one must have been all completely broke to pieces. But you see it's in rough shape, but it actually does work. If you look at the tracks, the pads on this side are conventional Grouser pads with square holes cut in them. Those holes were cut so that in the winter time the snow would pack inside the chains, and that would actually could make the chains get tight enough that they would break. I had it happen once on a crane. So that's the reason for, if you ever see square holes cut in track pads, that was for because they would run it in winter in the snow. And this is a homemade dozer frame, and it was set up as an angle. You could angle the blade by pulling the pin here and moving it back to the rear, angling the blade and moving it into the rear hole there, and it could be angled in the other direction also. Now if you come around front, you can see clearly where it says 28 on the radiator, and the crank is it's rather difficult to crank, but it's crank start only. We come around on this side, there are two more covers into the crankcase, and I took those off. That's where I accessed the oil pump drive to fix that. It still has the original Iceman magneto, at least original style Iceman magneto, and the blade is hydraulic, and they mounted the hydraulic pump here on the side, and if you look down in, it's chain driven off the water pump shaft, so it would have been live hydraulics, which many machines didn't have live hydraulics. So whoever did it, you know, they did a good job at that. You can come around and see the main fuel tank, and then this would have been the gasoline starting engine tank. The main fuel tank would have held distillate because this was a dual fuel, and the small tank would have held the gasoline for starting purposes. It's a 3-speed forward and 1 reverse transmission. You know, there's the kill switch, oil pressure gauge. You know, they just have the minimal. They have the valve for the blade mounted here on the side, and they had a rod going to the back, so when they were standing at the back they could control the blade. I would imagine if they wanted, because this being the frame coming around back and the big single cylinder that would push down, hence raising the blade, I suppose with this control for the blade right there, if they wanted to lower this down to chain onto a log or whatever, and then they could just pick it back up again without reaching up to the side to get at it. And now around on this side, we have different track pads. These would either be forged or cast steel. I couldn't tell you which. And these are factory winter pads, because these Grousers have these bumps on them, and those were to keep a crawler from sliding. If you're on a hillside, that was to help keep it from sliding sideways on the ice on a hill when you were sideways. I've done that with the D7. It can scare the heck out of you. And then now around back to the winch, there's the drum for the winch for pulling logs, and that's driven off out the shaft coming out the rear of the transmission. Let's see if we can see it here. But it's driven off shaft coming out the rear of the transmission, and that drives this automotive style differential. And normally when the engine clutch is engaged, the brake drum would just be spinning freely, and the cable drum would be stationary. Well, because this was spinning freely and that's stationary, you could actually pull that out backwards while it was running. I don't think it would be a good idea. And this would be just spinning the opposite direction. So when you hooked up a log, then you would apply the brake, because it's a mechanical drum brake. With this lever, You could apply the brake. See the mechanism work there. So that would stop the drum from spinning, hence transmitting the power to the cable drum on the other side and winch the log in. The cable went up to the top here, and if you saw in the earlier pictures, when I hauled it home, there was, you'd call it a boom, they maybe had a different name for it, logs, and I don't know, where the cable went out for picking up logs. You can see here is the axe that came with it. I got to keep that on there just for, you know, it's part of the story. So that's pretty much my Cat Model 28, and I don't think it's a OSHA approved ropes cage, but it's probably a lot better than nothing. And when summer comes, I hope to get a video of me starting it up again, and then I'll get that on. Thank you. We'll see you. Bye.